Hey everyone, welcome back to a story that starts in silence but ends in power. Before the truth unfolds, take a second to like, subscribe, and stay connected because stories like this are not just entertainment. They are reminders of what happens when a Black woman stops explaining herself and starts reclaiming her worth. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion, where underestimation becomes the enemy's downfall. This story begins the way many do, with assumptions so loud they drowned out the truth. I was standing inside a life I helped build, yet treated like a guest who overstayed her welcome. To them I was invisible, replaceable, financially dependent. A woman they believed survived off scraps of generosity rather than strategy, planning, and quiet sacrifice. They saw my calm nature and mistook it for weakness. They saw my silence and assumed ignorance. They never imagined I was the foundation holding everything together. The house was large, polished, and impressive to outsiders. To visitors it symbolized success. To me, it represented years of emotional labor, unseen effort, and invisible payments made without applause. Every light that turned on, every bill paid on time, every luxury maintained was quietly backed by money that never came with recognition. I never announced it. I never demanded credit. I simply handled it. That was my first mistake in their eyes, believing grace could coexist with respect. He began changing long before the truth surfaced. Confidence replaced humility. Arrogance replaced gratitude. Slowly, decisions were made without my input. My opinions were dismissed. My contributions minimized. My presence became tolerated rather than valued. I was no longer a partner. I was background noise in a life I helped finance. What they didn't know was that every month, without fail, I was paying nearly $8,000. Mortgage contributions disguised as generosity. Utilities masked as shared responsibility. Property costs quietly routed through my accounts. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because I believed in partnership. I believed in stability. I believed in us. But belief without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. Their narrative about me hardened. They told themselves I was broke. That I needed them. That I had nowhere else to go. They convinced themselves that my lifestyle existed because of their benevolence, not my bank transfers. And once people believe a lie long enough, they act boldly on it. The day everything shifted wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was cold, calculated, and cruel. I was removed from my own space emotionally long before they tried to remove me physically. They spoke about their house, their expenses, their sacrifices, while my contributions were erased like chalk in the rain. I was reduced to a liability instead of the lifeline I had been. That was the moment clarity arrived. Not in anger, not in tears, but in stillness. I realized that being misunderstood by people who benefit from your silence is not humility. It's permission. And I had given it for far too long. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't expose the truth prematurely. I observed. I documented. I prepared. Because power does not announce itself. It reveals itself at the perfect moment. They believed they had the upper hand. They believed control belonged to them. They believed I would crumble once pushed out. What they didn't know was that I was already gone emotionally and financially. I was the only thing holding the illusion together. As I stepped away internally, I began reclaiming myself externally. I reviewed records. I traced payments. I confirmed ownership details. I ensured that when the truth came, it would come clean, legal, and irreversible. This wasn't revenge fueled by emotion. It was accountability delivered by facts. By the end of that month, I made one decision. A single, quiet decision that would change everything. I stopped protecting people who never protected me. I stopped financing disrespect. I stopped paying to be erased. And as the next billing cycle approached, something monumental shifted. Not in the house, but in the balance of power. The silence before impact is always deceptive. They had no idea what was coming. And I let them enjoy their false confidence just a little longer. The first sign of collapse is never dramatic. It arrives quietly, disguised as confusion. When the payment didn't go through, there was no immediate panic, just mild irritation. A delayed confirmation. System error, they assumed. After all, things had always been handled. Bills had always been paid. Comfort had always been guaranteed. Why would that change? What they failed to understand was that consistency does not equal obligation. And silence does not equal submission. The second month told a different story. Systems don't forgive twice. Late notices don't whisper, they warn. What had once been effortless suddenly required attention. Calls were made, emails sent, questions asked. And for the first time, responsibility knocked on doors that had long been closed to it. So my name wasn't mentioned. My absence wasn't acknowledged. They were too busy scrambling to recognize the source of their former stability. Pride delayed the truth. Ego rejected reality. They believed they could fix it, cover it, handle it. They couldn't. The lifestyle they had grown comfortable with was never designed for their income alone. The structure was supported by a hidden pillar, and that pillar had stepped away. The house that once felt powerful now felt expensive. The utilities that once seemed automatic became burdensome. The image they projected cracked under the weight of unpaid reality. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction but with clarity. This wasn't about punishment. It was about revelation. I had not taken anything that wasn't mine. I had simply stopped giving what was never appreciated. The shift in energy was undeniable. Control breeds entitlement, and entitlement collapses when resources disappear. Suddenly my absence mattered. Not emotionally, financially. And that distinction said everything. Behind closed doors, blame circulated. Systems were accused. Circumstances cursed. But the truth hovered unspoken. Something had changed, and it wasn't external. It was me. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It came piece by piece. First through missed payments. Then through denied extensions. Then through the harsh language of legal notices that don't care about pride or assumptions. The house they once claimed as theirs began claiming them back, demanding what it was owed. And that was the moment understanding began to surface. They started reviewing accounts, tracking expenses, retracing steps. And eventually, inevitably, they found me not physically but financially. My name wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It was consistent. Repeated. Significant. Undeniable. $8,000 a month. Month after month. Quietly. Reliably. Without recognition. The image they had built of me shattered instantly. The broke woman. The dependent one. The useless presence. None of it survived the numbers. Reality does not negotiate with ego. It exposes it. But realization does not equal redemption. Even then there was no apology. No accountability. Just fear. Fear of loss. Fear of consequences. Fear of exposure. They didn't miss me, they missed what I provided. And that realization was the final confirmation I needed. I had not lost a home. I had escaped a financial prison disguised as partnership. And now the walls were closing in on the ones who believed I was disposable. The house no longer echoed with confidence. It echoed with urgency. Deadlines. Demands. Consequences. And the more they tried to regain control, the more the truth tightened its grip. This wasn't chaos. It was correction. And as the reality of eviction, debt, and collapse crept closer, one truth became impossible to ignore. Power had shifted completely. They thought I was broke and useless. But now they knew better. Power does not collapse loudly. It crumbles slowly, piece by piece, until the people standing on it realize there is nothing solid beneath their feet. By the time they fully understood what my absence meant, it was already too late to reverse anything. The damage wasn't emotional, it was structural. Financial. Legal. Permanent. The house that once symbolized dominance now felt like a ticking clock. Every unpaid notice tightened the pressure. Every overdue balance stripped away confidence. What had been a place of authority became a source of anxiety. The same walls that once echoed with entitlement now absorbed panic in silence. And still no accountability surfaced. Instead of reflection there was denial. Instead of humility there was resentment. They convinced themselves that the situation was temporary, that solutions would appear, that control could be reclaimed through force of will alone. That belief is common among those who have never truly carried the weight of responsibility. They had mistaken access for ownership and convenience for control. Behind the scenes, systems moved without emotion. Banks don't care about pride. Utility companies don't respect arrogance. Contracts don't bend for people who underestimated the fine print. The financial structure I had maintained wasn't flexible, it was precise. And once removed, it exposed exactly how fragile everything else was. This is the part of the story where many expect drama. Confrontations. Pleas. Threats. But none of that happened. Because desperation doesn't always reach outward. Sometimes it implodes. The realization that I had been essential didn't empower them. It humiliated them. And humiliation, when paired with ego, turns inward and destroys quietly. I remained unreachable by design. Not because I was hiding, but because access to me was no longer a right. I had learned that availability without appreciation is self-erasure. So I let silence do what explanations never could. Silence allowed reality to speak uninterrupted. The unraveling accelerated quickly after that. Late payments became violations. Violations became consequences. Consequences became unavoidable. The lifestyle they had built on my consistency could not survive without it. And the more they tried to sustain appearances, the faster everything deteriorated. The truth surfaced in layers. First among institutions. Then among acquaintances. Finally within themselves. People who once spoke my name dismissively now avoided it entirely. My absence became noticeable not because of my presence, but because of the gap I left behind. What they never understood was that I had not taken revenge. I had simply stopped absorbing damage. And when you stop being the shield, those who hide behind you are suddenly exposed to the storm. Every step of the collapse reinforced a single reality. I was never the weakest one in the room. I was the quietest. And quiet power is the most dangerous kind, because it doesn't announce itself before it moves. As the pressure mounted, their narrative shifted again. Now I was painted as calculating. Ungrateful. They reframed my financial autonomy as betrayal. This is a familiar tactic. When people benefit from your sacrifice, they call it love. When you reclaim it, they call it cruelty. But the numbers told the truth. The records didn't lie. The timelines aligned too perfectly to be dismissed. And slowly, painfully, the image they had built of themselves began to crack. Because recognizing my contribution meant acknowledging their dependence. And that was a truth they were never prepared to face. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding something entirely different. Not just a home, but an identity that no longer required validation. I wasn't reacting to their downfall. I was rising independently of it. My peace didn't come from watching them struggle. It came from knowing I had survived being erased and still stood whole. This chapter of the story is not about punishment. It's about exposure. About how systems reveal who actually holds power when illusions fade. About how a woman labeled useless can quietly be the engine behind everything that works. By the time the final consequences arrived, nothing could be negotiated. No appeals left. No favors owed. No leverage remaining. The foundation was gone, and the structure had no choice but to follow. They had thought removing me would simplify their lives. Instead, it dismantled them. And as the final notices approached, one undeniable truth settled in. Losing me didn't make them stronger. It revealed how weak they had always been without me. Consequences do not rush. They arrive exactly on time, carrying receipts, records, and finality. By the moment everything became irreversible, the illusion of control had completely evaporated. What remained was exposure. Not the dramatic kind that explodes in public, but the quiet, humiliating kind that follows people into every corner of their private lives. The house was no longer just a financial burden. It had become evidence. Evidence of overconfidence. Evidence of dependence. Evidence of a system built on someone else's strength while pretending it was self-made. Every unpaid obligation traced itself back to the same truth. The structure had never been sustainable without me. This was the stage where panic finally replaced denial. Deadlines were no longer flexible. Notices were no longer warnings. Institutions stopped asking and started enforcing. The same authority figures who once felt untouchable now found themselves powerless in conversations they could not control. What made this collapse different was its precision. Nothing was random. Nothing was sudden. Every outcome followed a clear, documented path. I had not pulled a rug from under them. I had stepped away from a floor that was never mine to hold alone. Gravity did the rest. The emotional weight of the situation shifted as well. Fear began replacing arrogance. The confidence they once carried dissolved into desperation disguised as anger. They didn't mourn the loss of partnership. They mourned the loss of comfort. And that distinction mattered. People often reveal their true values when resources disappear. Gratitude shows itself through respect, not words spoken in crisis. And when the pressure peaked, there was no respect to be found, only entitlement scrambling for survival. I remained distant, not out of cruelty but clarity. There was nothing left to explain. The facts had already spoken. Re-entering that space would have meant minimizing my own truth to soothe someone else's consequences. And I refused to shrink myself again. The power shift was now visible beyond closed doors. What had once been presented as dominance was exposed as dependency. The image they had curated began to fracture publicly, not through scandal but through absence. Absence of stability. Absence of certainty. Absence of the woman who made everything function. Behind that image collapse was a deeper reckoning. They were forced to confront a version of themselves that had never existed independently. And that confrontation was brutal. Because accepting the truth meant admitting that the woman they dismissed was the reason their world worked at all. Meanwhile, my life moved forward without disruption. That is the part no one expects. Freedom didn't feel chaotic, it felt quiet. I wasn't rebuilding from ruin. I was redirecting energy that had been drained for years. My finances stabilized instantly. My mind cleared. My future stopped revolving around someone else's approval. This is the hidden cost of underestimating a woman who moves in silence. When she leaves, she doesn't collapse. She accelerates. The consequences they faced were not exaggerated. They were proportional. Bills unpaid led to actions taken. Agreements broken led to penalties enforced. Systems did exactly what systems are designed to do. There was no villain here. Just accountability finally catching up. And with each enforced consequence, another illusion died. The illusion of authority. The illusion of independence. The illusion that power is loud. True power had been quiet all along, and now that it was gone, the noise of failure was impossible to ignore. This chapter marks the moment where sympathy ends. Not because struggle isn't human, but because exploitation is not accidental. They benefited knowingly. They dismissed intentionally. And they assumed endlessly. The final attempts to regain footing were desperate and disorganized. There was no strategy left, only reaction. No leverage, only regret. And regret without accountability changes nothing. As the situation reached its point of no return, one truth stood above all others. I had not destroyed anything. I had simply stopped saving something that refused to value me. The world did not fall apart when I left. Only their illusion did. And as the dust settled, the balance of power was no longer debatable. It was documented. It was enforced. And it was final. By the time the dust settled, the story had shifted completely. What had begun as an act of perceived weakness had evolved into the clearest demonstration of strength imaginable. They had thought me disposable, powerless, and irrelevant. They had mistaken my grace for submission and my silence for ignorance. But as the consequences of their underestimation fully unfolded, it became undeniable who truly held control. I did not stand in the wreckage of their world. I stood outside it, composed, unshaken, and fully aware of the power I had always wielded. The payments I had quietly made for years were only one part of the story. The larger truth was that I had cultivated patience, precision, and foresight. I had not reacted to disrespect. I had prepared for it. And in that preparation lay the ultimate victory. The house that had been a symbol of my supposed dependence was no longer a battleground. It was irrelevant. What mattered was the demonstration of autonomy and accountability. They were left grappling with instability while I continued forward with confidence. Every document, every record, every trace of what had been unseen now acted as proof of what I had always been: capable, resilient, and indispensable. Power reveals itself in the way you move when everyone believes you are gone. I moved with clarity. I invested in myself without hesitation. I rebuilt my world not by revenge but by strategy. And the most powerful form of revenge is visible success. Living without apology, without obstruction, and without reliance on those who never valued you. As the story spread through those who had witnessed the consequences unfold, the image of me transformed. No longer was I the quiet, broke woman in the background. I became a force defined by action and consistency. People began to understand that what had been perceived as generosity was actually competence. What had been perceived as dependence was actually autonomy masked by discretion. And what had been underestimated as weakness was, in fact, dominion waiting for its moment. By now, every attempt to reclaim control from them had failed. Systems enforced consequences with impartial precision. The house, the bills, the lifestyle they assumed they had owned, all became reminders of the infrastructure I had sustained quietly. I had not fought to take revenge. I had merely stopped propping up a facade they called stability. And when you stop doing the work for someone who refuses to recognize your value, the fallout exposes truth with brutal clarity. The lesson in all of this is undeniable. Underestimate a Black woman, and you will eventually witness the extent of her preparation and power. We are often quiet but never absent. Invisible but always present in the structures we help maintain. Silent but deeply strategic. The world may not see the labor we do, the foresight we plan, or the sacrifices we make, until we stop. And when we do, the ripple is unavoidable. I moved forward with no bitterness, no backward glances, and no desire to destroy. The universe handles the reckoning. I simply ensured I was no longer complicit in sustaining a false narrative of dependence. My resources, my finances, and my mind were redirected toward what truly mattered: independence, success, and self-respect. By the end, the story was no longer about what they lost. It was about what I gained: freedom, clarity, and the undeniable acknowledgement of my power. Every silent payment, every unseen effort, every underestimated act became the foundation of my dominion. I did not seek revenge. I demanded accountability. I did not crave recognition. I claimed my worth. I did not retaliate. I transcended. The final chapter of this story is not marked by anger, tears, or confrontation. It is marked by triumph. By presence. By knowing that when you honor your own value, the world is forced to recognize it, whether they like it or not. I became the embodiment of resilience, the definition of strategy, the model of power that no one can ignore. And so the narrative closes where it began, not with submission but with ascendancy. They thought I was broke. They thought I was useless. And when I removed myself from the system they depended upon, they saw the truth, undeniable, unshakable, and irreversible. I had not only survived. I had risen. I had dominated. I had won. This is the story of a woman underestimated, unappreciated, and dismissed, and how she transformed quiet strength into undeniable dominion. Welcome to the reality they could never imagine and the victory they could never prevent. The Black Queen always rises.